No sooner than I had posted the podcast, We Are Not in Power, a few days ago, no sooner than that, the very next day, perhaps, that the Republic, that on how this whole thing was about how we do not need to surrender anymore as conservatives if we're going to sustain the Republic, sustain democracy. We cannot surrender. We must compromise. Compromise must be real compromise, meaning it doesn't take you away from the goal. But no sooner had I posted that and talked about how Republicans have spent decades surrendering rather than compromising. No sooner had I posted that than the Republicans in Madison on the stewardship issue proposed surrender rather than compromise. They didn't get away with it, not yet anyway. And I'll be talking about that in just a few moments. But first, a few housekeeping things. This is American Investigator. I am Richard Moore. Richard Moore In Depth is the Substack. I hope you'll subscribe. And if you're not subscribing, or if you are subscribing, I hope you'll consider a paid subscription and also getting the word out to other people. Next week, now, normally on these podcasts, I'm going to be posting the lightly edited, as it were, transcripts for everybody to read. And then the audio portion of the podcast, I will be putting behind a paywall for paid premium members. So as a perk for them, because I've had a lot of requests that the written stuff, well, a lot of people would rather listen to it. They don't have the time to read it, and they can listen to it on the treadmill, what have you. But next week, I'm going to have a guest, and that guest, nothing's going to be behind the paid wall, because this also involves stewardship. It involves conservation easements, and you're going to want to listen to this. His name is Jason Hastings. He is a great guy. He is from Price County. That's next door to where I live. He is a business owner over there, and he is also a county board supervisor. And as it happens, they've had a lot of this stewardship easement issues going on in Price County. He's going to be here to take us through it. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a fascinating podcast. But I think that if you don't think we need to put a stop to all the land acquisitions, well, even though we have millions of acres of land, if you don't think we need to pursue stewardship reform, that stewardship, conservation easement reform, that these conservation easements are not about conservation. They are about woke profiteering, and more than that, they're about foreign profiteering for the largest part. If you don't think we need that, then you need to listen to this podcast because it'll open your eyes. Also next week, I'd like to once again promote another podcast that I do with host Jennifer Meadows and co-host Curtis Mang. It's called Some Things Considered. That'll be posted first of next week, but I'll post the link to it when it is. This week, we're going to be delving into a really, really fun topic. This is not a political podcast, or at least it's not overtly political. Some people say it is. But anyway, the topic this week is sort of like, where were you? What did you think? When did you realize that for most of your life, the government has been lying to you, that things aren't the way they seem? Well, not just in the political sense with the government, but in all walks of life. And what can we do about it? What is your take on it? Because I think it's really hitting a nerve here with people that those of us in politics, we know the government has been lying to us for a long, long, long time. But a lot of people still don't know it. I think, though, most people do on some level understand that there's been a game of charades played with the American people for decades now. The COVID pandemic exposed most of it for those who were blind until then. But we'll explore that, what it means, what to do about it. And that's going to be Some Things Considered next week. I am going to be raising the rent here, raising the price on paid subscriptions, because my new book, The Rise of Bureaucratic Bossism, will be coming out shortly. I'm going to be serializing it on the Substack page. And so therefore, it does require an increase in the subscription price. But here today, what I'd like to encourage you to get a paid annual subscription if you want. Before then, that way you'll have access to the print book as well as the digital version of the book. For those who are already paid subscribers, I should remind everybody the price for you does not go up. That's a Substack thing. Once you subscribe at whatever price you subscribed at, that's the price you stay at. The monthly price is going to be significantly higher than the annual price for bookkeeping reasons, but you can stay there. But for those of you who are free subscribers, would like to get in on the podcast as well as the special reports and the books, access to the books, I would encourage you to make a paid subscription before April 1st when the prices increase. And then I'm going to throw in a sweetener, as it were. And the sweetener is for those of you who can get me 5 new subscribers to my Substack. Don't have to be paid subscribers, just free subscribers. I'll throw in a free annual paid membership. All you do, send me the 5 names. I'll check to see if they've subscribed. If they have, then bam, you're in. Now let's talk about stewardship. I got a note the other day, and it was from a reader after I posted the other podcast and after I had written about stewardship, and I've written about it ad nauseum almost. And the reader, it wasn't bad. It was just short and sweet. It's like, you need to stay out of the woods. You need to stay, I'm paraphrasing here, you need to stay off the water. You need to stay on concrete and don't go to the state parks. And that was his reaction, because I guess he wants land acquisition. He wants this full throttle stewardship program. And frankly, I don't know what his political leanings are, but even some conservatives fall for this pitch, this line. And it really struck me is, he may say that, but I don't know why I have to stay out of the state parks. I love the state parks. I haven't advocating getting rid of any of the lands, although under a 2-year review on the assembly passed version of this bill, which I support, they would review what lands we need to keep and review also what lands might need to be protected or sold. But I have never proposed getting rid of any of our state parks. In fact, the bill that I support, which is the version that the assembly passed, actually increases funding to maintain and improve the properties the state already owns. Very important point. Land acquisition is the money, by and large, is being shifted to property improvement and maintenance. The state park system will benefit from the assembly passed version, which is the version, by the way, if you're keeping track and you want to get in touch with your lawmakers, is the version that needs to be passed. And of course, some people might say, well, but we could add more state parks if we got more money for land acquisition. And that's just not true. You're not going to add more state parks. I mean, conceivably you could, but there's a key point here. When this past week, after the assembly passed what I thought was an acceptable, good bill, the Republican authors came through and said, we're going to compromise and give $2.5 million to nonprofits for land acquisition. Now, it would be bad enough if they said we're going to go from virtually nothing for land acquisition beyond the Ice Age Trail and some minor below 5-acre parcels. That would be bad enough, but if they just gave it to the DNR for land acquisition, but they're giving it to nonprofits. And what this means is the nonprofits aren't using that money to buy land to create state parks. They're using that money to slap conservation easements on those properties. And so they freeze the land in place undeveloped land in place. Some of it is quite developable over the next 50 years if conditions change or there's an economic opportunity. Some of it would never be developed anyway, but you foreclose any opportunity to do anything with those lands. And there aren't going to be any state parks created on these lands and conservation easements. And even the uses that are preserved under the terms of a conservation easements aren't necessarily going to be protected. You might have a parcel now that is being logged for timber and they preserve that use. Or you might have a parcel under a conservation easement that is being farmed. And so they say we're in the fine print, we're preserving the agricultural use. But that's not the end of the fine print. The end of the fine print, the add-on to the fine print is that if conditions change and we have to do something to preserve the top use, the top priority of the easement land, which is conservation, then we might have to sacrifice those other uses that are now being preserved, meaning we might have to end logging, we might have to end the timber industry's activities there, we might have to end farming on those lands. The only thing that is preserved in perpetuity is the conservation, no matter if economic conditions change and no matter if environmental conditions change, such that lands that were once considered necessary to be protected are no longer considered necessary to be protected. It's a big scam. So the Republicans then, that takes us, let's talk about original intent. The Assembly bill was a good compromise, I thought, because it preserves original intent of the stewardship program. The original intent of the stewardship program was not to create a land buying machine that would gobble up land forever. It was meant to be a program that would sunset in 10 years, that the state would go out and scour and inventory what properties, what sensitive habitats and properties needed to be preserved. We would spend the money, we would bond for that money, we would preserve those lands, and then the program would end and government would get out of the land buying business. And after that, if a property needed to be protected, it could be considered by the state legislature and the agency, the DNR, on a case-by-case basis, a very, very reasonable approach to conservation. And so the Assembly bill ended the land acquisition portion for at least 2 years, authorized or demanded, required a study to see just exactly what lands that we need to protect, what are the real land needs of the state of Wisconsin, and then we go from there. That doesn't take us away from the original goal. It actually takes us toward the original goal and is a good compromise. But when you turn around and say we're going to give $2.5 million to nonprofits so they can just continue to acquire land through conservation easement, we continue the folly of throwing money down the toilet and taking good land off the tax rolls. Where are we with the stewardship program? Well, where we are is we have 30% of some counties, more than 30% of the county where I live, in Oneida County, is publicly owned. We've got 17% of the state publicly owned. We've got 1 out of every 6 acres publicly owned. How many more do we need? We're $530 million, at least we were last April, $530 million in debt. And that's another point about the stewardship program. This money is not money that is budgeted, allocated out of tax revenue in the general fund. It's borrowed. And then we got to pay it back, and we got to pay interest on that as well. And as of last April, as I say, it was $530 million. Do we need more state parks? Well, maybe we need to make a discussion about that. But right now, we have 50 state parks and about 156,000 acres of land for state parks. I love state parks. Is that enough? Probably so, especially when you consider that that's just the park. When you take a look at the entire park system, the trails, the forest, the properties that surround the actual park perimeter, it's 1.2 million acres. I will hopefully enjoy those. We need to sustain them. We need to improve them. We need to maintain the infrastructure. And that's what the Assembly bill does. The proposed Senate bill, which has been sent back to committee, does not do that. It continues to allow the nonprofits to run wild. And once again, we have been set up for a defeat, set up for surrender rather than compromise on this legislation. Now, some breaking news, which also this morning, which also feeds into this whole thing about compromise and surrender. The Supreme Court of the United States has just ruled on a 6-3 vote that Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional. I know a lot of conservatives had weighed in on those lawsuits with briefs opposing Trump's constitutional authority to impose the tariffs under the Emergency Powers Act. And frankly, this was a decision that did not surprise me. It could have very, very negative consequences. But those tariffs were going, no matter how you feel about the tariffs, let's just take a look at the raw numbers. They were going to provide about $2.5 trillion over the next decade. That revenue is going to be, well, not all of it will disappear, but it's going to take a deep, deep pocket. There's going to have to be refunds given that are going to total hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, Trump is not completely defeated on this. The mainstream media will tell you he is, but he isn't. There are tariffs like on aluminum and steel that aren't affected by this. There are also other statutes that Trump can use to levy tariffs, such as the 1974 Trade Act, which allows the president to levy taxes when there are unfair trade practices, when another country is found to have committed or engaged in unfair trade practices. We have long found that about China and other nations. So it's not going to end them totally, but clearly it's more of an obstacle now for his agenda. But the real question is, and why doesn't Congress step in and pass the tariffs? Because essentially the Supreme Court decision said that is Congress's jurisdiction. And so there's a good argument to me that it is in fact Congress's jurisdiction, except for those narrow statutes that Trump can now use. And so the message I would take is the Republicans need to stand up and fulfill their constitutional responsibility. They need to go on the record, have a vote on the tariffs. A lot of conservatives I know don't like the tariffs. I happen to support the tariffs. But however you stand on the issue, Congress now should stand up and vote yay or nay on Trump's tariffs while we have the majority, and Trump can sign them into place, and let the American people decide based on the economic consequences or benefits, as the case may be down the road, who was right and who was wrong. Once again, this is a form of surrender if Congress just relies on the Supreme Court to make it say and then go away and leave the Trump administration to deal with the aftermath. And by the way, for those interested in the votes, you had the three liberals voting against the administration. That's Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan. You had Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts joining them for the 6 votes against the administration. And you had Thomas Alito and Kavanaugh siding with the Trump administration. It's a fascinating argument, but it's one that Congress needs to, it's a debate and deliberation Congress needs to be involved in. And too often they're not involved in any of it, which is really part, if not most, of the problem. That's all I have for today. Please contact your legislators in the Senate, particularly, and tell them how you feel on the stewardship bill. We don't need to be more surrender here. We need compromise. We need to get on the bandwagon, put an end to this program, and then again, go back to the assembly version of this bill. It requires a 2-year review of the program. All the agencies can get involved. The legislature can get involved. The stakeholders can get involved. Property rights advocates can get involved and see what this program is, what it has been doing, what it is all about, and where we need to head with it. That is the common sense way to go to pass the assembly version that's before us now. Thank you, everybody. I hope everybody has a great weekend. I'm Richard Moore.